dawn breaks over the narrow mountain pass. In 1,500 armored knights, the finest warriors gold can buy, march confidently through the mist-shrouded valley below. They have no idea they're being watched. Above them, hidden among the rocks and trees, 2,000 farmers and shepherds wait in absolute silence, their hands gripping crude weapons, their hearts pounding like war drums. In less than an hour, this frozen November morning will witness one of history's most devastating ambushes, a massacre so complete it will shatter an empire's pride and birth a nation that endures to this very day. This is Morgarten, 1315, where everything you think you know about medieval warfare is about to be turned upside down. To understand what happened on that blood-soaked morning, we need to travel back through the fog of centuries to a world most of us can barely imagine. The year is 1315, and Europe is ruled by dynasties whose names echo through history like thunder. The Habsburgs stand among the mightiest of them all, their power radiating from Austria across vast territories, their ambition knowing no bounds. For generations, they've been tightening their grip on the Alpine passes, those crucial mountain corridors where merchants and armies alike must travel between the wealthy Italian city-states and the markets of Northern Europe. Whoever controls these passes controls unimaginable wealth. But there's a problem festering in the heart of Habsburg territory, a problem that's been growing more dangerous with each passing year. Nestled deep within the mountains, three small communities, Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, have been acting with increasing independence. These are not sophisticated city-states with grand cathedrals and universities. These are rough, hard-scrabble communities of farmers, herdsmen, and woodsmen who've learned to scratch out a living in some of the harshest terrain in Europe. The mountains have made them different, harder, more self-reliant than the valley dwellers who've grown soft under noble protection. The Habsburg Duke Leopold I, a man whose pride matches his political ambition, cannot tolerate this defiance. For him, it's not merely about control or taxation, though both matter enormously. It's about something deeper, more visceral. These mountain folk, these commoners, have dared to suggest they can govern themselves, that they don't need the guiding hand of their noble betters. To Leopold and his fellow aristocrats, this is an obscenity that threatens the very foundation of their world. If word spreads that peasants can successfully resist noble authority, the entire feudal order might unravel like a poorly woven tapestry. The conflict has been building for years, erupting in skirmishes and raids, with the mountain communities forming what they call an everlasting league, a mutual defense pact sworn in August of 1291. They've already fought off smaller Habsburg incursions, but Leopold is done with half measures. He's assembling an army, a real army of professional soldiers, armored knights whose families have been training for war since before their grandfathers could walk. These aren't farmhands playing at soldier. These are killing machines wrapped in steel, mounted on massive war horses, bred specifically for combat, each knight supported by squires, footmen, and servants. A single mounted knight represents an investment equal to a modern tank, years of training and equipment that costs more than most commoners will earn in their entire lives. The mountain folk know what's coming. Their scouts have been watching the Habsburg forces gather, counting the banners, estimating the numbers, and the reports grow more terrifying with each passing day. 1,500 knights at minimum, possibly more, along with supporting infantry. Against this, the three forest communities can muster perhaps 2,000 men, but these aren't soldiers in any conventional sense. They're men who know how to swing an axe because they clear forests, who can move silently through mountain terrain because they hunt there, who can endure cold and hardship because their lives have never offered them any alternative. They have almost no armor, few horses, and their weapons are farming implements, hastily adapted for war. Halberds that started life as brush-cutting tools, heavy clubs, crossbows used for hunting game. By every conventional measure of military strength, this shouldn't even be a contest. The Habsburg army should sweep through these mountains like a scythe through wheat, crushing all resistance, making examples of the ringleaders, and restoring proper order. Duke Leopold certainly thinks so. His confidence isn't mere arrogance, it's based on centuries of military tradition that says heavily armored cavalry is the supreme force on any battlefield. Knights have dominated European warfare for hundreds of years, their charges breaking infantry formations, their armor making them nearly invincible to common weapons. What could shepherds possibly do against such power? But Leopold and his commanders are about to learn a lesson that will be written in blood and remembered for centuries. They're marching into terrain they don't truly understand, against an enemy who knows every stone and tree, every hidden path and treacherous slope. The mountain folk aren't planning to meet the Habsburgs in open battle, where steel and horseflesh would crush them. They're planning something far more terrible, far more cunning. November 15th, 1315. The date itself carries weight when you understand what's happening across Europe at this exact moment. The continent is struggling through the Great Famine, a catastrophic climate disaster that's been starving millions since 1315 began. Endless rains have destroyed crops, livestock are dying, and desperate people are resorting to unthinkable measures just to survive another day. In this context of suffering and chaos, Leopold's military campaign might seem like madness, but for him, it's opportunity. With so many people weakened and desperate, now is the perfect time to assert control, to remind everyone who holds real power. The Habsburg army marches south from the city of Zug, following the eastern shore of Lake Egerie. It's a route that makes perfect strategic sense on a map, the shortest path toward the heart of Schwyz's territory. The army moves in a long column because the narrow paths between the lake and the steep mountainside simply won't accommodate any other formation. This would normally be cause for concern. Any competent commander knows that strung-out columns are vulnerable, but Leopold's officers aren't worried. What possible threat could mountain peasants pose? The very idea that these commoners might actually attack such a formidable force seems absurd. Above them, hidden in the forests that cloak the slopes of the Morgarten mountain, 2,000 men have been waiting since before dawn. They've been positioned with careful precision, not randomly scattered, but placed according to a plan that shows sophisticated understanding of terrain and tactics. The leader of this ambush is almost certainly Werner Stauffacher, though the historical records from this period are frustratingly sparse, and we'll never know all the details with certainty. What we do know is that someone among the mountain folk possessed genuine military genius, the kind of tactical insight that professional soldiers train their entire lives to develop. The ambush site has been chosen with devastating care. The path the Habsburgs must follow runs along a narrow strip of ground between Lake Egerie on one side and extremely steep, heavily forested slopes on the other. It's a natural killing ground, and the defenders have made it even more lethal. They've pre-positioned massive logs and boulders on the slopes above, held in place by ropes and wedges that can be released on command. They've studied the timing, practiced the signals, made sure every man knows exactly what he's supposed to do and when. This isn't a panicked defensive action, this is a carefully orchestrated execution. As the vanguard of the Habsburg army enters the killing zone, everything seems peaceful. Birds call from the trees, the cold November wind ripples the surface of the lake, frost crunches under the hooves of the war horses. The knights are talking among themselves, probably complaining about the cold, discussing what they'll do to the mountain folk when they catch them, making crude jokes to pass the time. Their armor clanks and rattles with each step, a sound that normally strikes terror into the hearts of enemies, but today will serve a different purpose. Today, it's simply noise that masks other sounds, the whisper of men breathing, the creak of ropes under tension, the scrape of wood on stone. The signal comes. We don't know what it was, perhaps a horn blast, perhaps a shouted command, perhaps just a prearranged moment when enough of the enemy column had entered the trap. Suddenly, the morning explodes into chaos and horror beyond anything these professional soldiers have encountered in their careers. From the slopes above, an avalanche of logs and boulders comes crashing down, massive objects tumbling and bouncing with gathering momentum, smashing into the packed column of knights and horses below. The sound must have been deafening, the screaming of crushed men and animals, the thunder of rolling stone, the splintering of wood and bone. A warhorse in full armor with its rider can weigh well over a ton, but when a boulder the size of a wagon wheel strikes it at terminal velocity, the result is catastrophic. Knights are smashed from their saddles, their expensive armor offering no protection whatsoever against such massive impacts. Horses go down screaming, their legs shattered, their bodies crushed, and in the narrow confines of the path, every fallen horse and rider becomes an obstacle that blocks those behind them. The carefully organized column disintegrates into a trapped, milling mass of terrified animals and desperate men. And this is just the beginning. As the initial shock of the rockfall passes, the defenders come pouring down from the slopes, 2,000 men moving with the confidence of hunters who've just driven prey into a trap. They're not charging recklessly, but advancing in a controlled wave, using the terrain they know intimately while their enemies floundered in unfamiliar ground. The primary weapon of the Swiss defenders is the halberd, and in this kind of close-quarters chaos, it proves devastatingly effective. The halberd is a fascinating weapon that represents the ingenuity of common folk adapting what they have to meet military necessity. It's essentially a long pole, sometimes 12 feet or more, topped with a combination axe blade, spear point, and hook. The axe can cleave through armor, the spear can thrust into gaps in defenses, and the hook, oh, the hook is particularly cruel. It can catch in armor or horse tack and drag a mounted knight right out of his saddle. Once an armored knight is on the ground, he becomes extraordinarily vulnerable. That armor that protects him from arrows and sword cuts is suddenly a death trap, weighing him down, making it nearly impossible to regain his footing on the rough, blood-slicked ground. The defenders show no mercy because they know they can expect none. This isn't a tournament with rules and ransoms. This is existential warfare. If they lose, their communities will be destroyed, their leaders executed, their families enslaved or scattered. So they fight with the desperation of men defending their homes and the calculated brutality of hunters butchering animals. Knights who fall are swarmed by multiple attackers, halberds and clubs rising and falling, finding the gaps in armor at joints and neck, the percussion of metal on metal mixing with sounds no human should have to hear. Duke Leopold, somewhere in this nightmare, is trying desperately to organize a response, but everything that makes knights effective in open battle works against them here. Their armor makes them slow and clumsy on foot. Their war horses, trained to charge forward and trample enemies, can't maneuver in the chaos. Their long lances are useless at close range, and even their swords can't reach enemies who attack from above with longer weapons. Some knights try to retreat, but the press of men and animals behind them makes it impossible. Some try to advance, to break through and reach open ground, but the defenders blocked the path ahead. Some try to climb the slopes and get at their tormentors, but the steep terrain and their heavy armor make this effectively impossible, and they're cut down as they struggle upward. The lake offers no escape either. The cold November water would be fatal even without the weight of armor dragging men down. A few desperate souls try it anyway, and their screams as the freezing water fills their lungs adds another layer to the symphony of horror echoing across the valley. This is war stripped of all romance and glory, reduced to its essential nature, organized murder on a mass scale, and the professional soldiers who thought themselves superior to common folk are learning that in the right circumstances, with the right tactics, shepherds can slaughter knights like wolves bringing down elk. The battle, if you can even call it that, lasts perhaps an hour, though for those trapped in the killing zone it must feel like an eternity. When it finally ends, not because the defenders have grown tired, but because there are simply no more enemies left to kill in the immediate area, the scale of the catastrophe becomes apparent. Bodies and parts of bodies lie scattered across hundreds of yards of path. The ground is churned into bloody mud, trampled by thousands of hooves and feet. Wounded men and horses are making pitiful sounds, begging for death that will come soon enough. The survivors, and there aren't many, are fleeing in absolute panic, throwing away weapons and even armor in their desperation to escape. The exact casualty figures from Morgarten will never be known with certainty because medieval record-keeping, especially from the losing side, tends to be unreliable. Contemporary chronicles suggest that somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 Habsburg soldiers died that morning, with Duke Leopold himself narrowly escaping with his life. The losses among the defenders were reportedly minimal, perhaps a few dozen dead, though again, we can't be completely certain. What matters more than precise numbers is the proportion. This wasn't a hard-fought battle where both sides suffered grievous losses. This was a one-sided massacre that shocked all of Europe. When word of disaster reaches the Habsburg court, the reaction is a mixture of disbelief and rage. How could this have happened? How could the finest knights in the empire, men whose families had been warriors since time immemorial, be defeated, not just defeated, but utterly destroyed by peasants? The instinct is to dismiss the whole thing as a fluke, an accident of terrain that couldn't possibly be repeated. But deep down, the nobles of Europe understand that something fundamental has changed. The invincibility of armored cavalry, the cornerstone of feudal military power, has been proven false. It will take decades for the full implications to sink in, but the world has shifted on its axis. For the mountain communities, Morgarten is a transformational victory that will shape their identity for centuries to come. In the immediate aftermath, the three forest communities solidify their alliance, and other alpine communities begin joining them, drawn by the promise of freedom from noble domination and protection through collective defense. This is the nucleus of what will eventually become the Swiss Confederation, one of the most unusual political entities in European history, a republic in an age of monarchies, a confederation of communities that will successfully resist imperial power for hundreds of years. But the real genius of Morgarten isn't just military, it's psychological and political. The mountain folk have demonstrated that commoners, properly organized and fighting on terrain they understand, can defeat professional soldiers. They've shown that expensive armor and noble birth don't guarantee victory. They've proven that a community of free people fighting to defend their homes possesses advantages that mercenaries fighting for pay can never match. These lessons will not be forgotten. When Swiss mercenaries become the most sought-after soldiers in Europe over the following centuries, it's because of the reputation built at Morgarten and battles like it. The tactical innovations displayed at Morgarten will influence military thinking across Europe. The effectiveness of infantry armed with pole weapons against cavalry will lead to the development of pike formations that will dominate battlefields for the next 2 centuries. The Swiss will perfect these tactics, becoming feared throughout Europe for their discipline and ferocity. At battles like Sempach in 1386 and Grandson in 1476, Swiss infantry will continue to demolish forces that should, by all conventional wisdom, defeat them. The phrase Swiss courage will enter multiple languages, signifying a kind of stubborn, almost reckless bravery that refuses to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. The Habsburgs, for their part, will never forget this humiliation. They'll make multiple attempts to reconquer the rebellious mountain communities, but each effort will end in failure or stalemate. Eventually, grudgingly, they'll be forced to acknowledge Swiss independence, at least in practice, if not always in legal theory. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 would finally formalize what Morgarten made inevitable: the Swiss Confederation's complete independence from the Holy Roman Empire. But by that point, Switzerland will have been effectively independent for over 3 centuries, an island of republican government in a sea of monarchies, a refuge for religious minorities and political dissidents, a banking center that will transform European finance. Walking the ground today, centuries after that brutal November morning, you can still feel the weight of what happened here. The narrow path between the lake and the mountain is wider now, paved and safe, but if you climb up into the forests above, you can see what the Habsburg commanders failed to understand until it was too late. The slopes are steep, covered with trees and rocks that offer infinite hiding places and defensive positions. The lake still glimmers below, cold and deep. A monument stands here now, erected by a nation that traces its birth to this place, to this moment when everything changed. But here's what makes Morgarten truly remarkable beyond just the military victory. The battle became a founding myth for Switzerland, a story told and retold, embellished and celebrated, that helped forge a national identity centered on resistance to tyranny, defense of freedom, and the idea that ordinary citizens, properly organized and motivated, can defend themselves against any threat. Whether every detail of the traditional story is historically accurate matters less than what the story represents and what it inspired. The psychological impact of Morgarten on both victors and vanquished cannot be overstated. For the Swiss, it became proof that their cause was just, that God favored the righteous over the powerful, that their methods of warfare were superior to the aristocratic traditions that dominated Europe. This confidence would permeate Swiss culture, military organization, and political development for centuries. The idea of the citizen soldier, the man who is a farmer or tradesman in peacetime, but a warrior when his community needs defending, becomes central to Swiss identity. Even today, Switzerland maintains a militia-based military system where most adult males serve and keep their weapons at home, a direct descendant of the traditions forged at Morgarten. For the Habsburgs and the wider European aristocracy, Morgarten was a nightmare that challenged fundamental assumptions about the social order. If common people could defeat knights, what did that say about the divine right of nobles to rule? If peasants armed with farm tools could overcome warriors in expensive armor, what justified the entire feudal system of military obligation and social hierarchy? These questions wouldn't be answered overnight, and the aristocracy would fight desperately to maintain their privilege for centuries more, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The battle also demonstrated the crucial importance of terrain and tactics over simple numerical superiority or quality of equipment. Military theorists would study Morgarten for centuries, recognizing it as an early example of asymmetric warfare, where a weaker force uses superior knowledge of terrain, careful preparation, and unconventional tactics to overcome a stronger enemy. You can draw a direct line from Morgarten to countless later conflicts where guerrilla fighters or irregular forces have successfully resisted conventional armies, from the American Revolution to modern insurgencies. The fundamental principle remains the same. An army is only as strong as its ability to bring its power to bear, and the right tactics in the right terrain can neutralize even overwhelming material advantage. The cultural impact extends beyond military history. Morgarten helped create the Swiss myth of exceptionalism, the idea that Switzerland was fundamentally different from other European nations because it was founded by free people defending their liberty rather than by conquest or royal decree. This myth became self-reinforcing, shaping how the Swiss saw themselves and how they organized their society. The emphasis on local autonomy, direct democracy in many cantons, military neutrality that relies on making invasion too costly rather than on alliances with powerful neighbors. All of these distinctive features of Swiss political culture can be traced back, at least in part, to the lessons and legends of Morgarten. As the sun set on that November evening in 1315, painting the blood-soaked ground in shades of crimson and gold, no one could have predicted the full significance of what had just occurred. The men cleaning their weapons and tending their wounded couldn't know they had just participated in one of history's pivotal moments, a battle that would be studied and remembered 700 years later. They only knew they had survived, that their homes were safe for now, that they had proven something important about courage and freedom and the power of people fighting for what they believe in. The bodies scattered across the killing ground, Habsburg knights, whose names are mostly lost to history now, had died believing in a world order that was already beginning to crumble. They were the last generation to have absolute faith in the supremacy of armored cavalry, in the natural right of nobles to command and commoners to obey. Their deaths, however horrible, helped create space for something new. The possibility that government could be based on consent rather than conquest, that military power could flow from citizen soldiers rather than professional warriors, that a small nation could maintain its independence through the courage of its people rather than the favor of powerful allies. Morgarten was not the end of Swiss struggles for independence. It was barely the beginning. Decades and centuries of conflict lay ahead, victories and defeats, compromises and catastrophes. But the lesson of that November morning never faded. When Swiss soldiers faced overwhelming odds at Sempach, when Swiss politicians resisted pressure from the Habsburgs and later from Napoleonic France, when Swiss citizens debated the shape of their government and their role in Europe, the ghost of Morgarten was always there, whispering that the impossible could be achieved, that the powerful could be resisted, that freedom was worth any price. Today, Switzerland stands as one of the world's most stable, prosperous, and peaceful nations, famous for neutrality, banking, chocolate, and watches, rather than for military prowess. But that peaceful present rests on a foundation of disciplined military resistance to tyranny, a tradition born in blood at Morgarten. Every Swiss citizen who keeps a rifle in their home as part of the militia system, every local community that insists on its right to self-governance, every Swiss voter who participates in direct democracy is, in some sense, a descendant of those 2,000 men who waited in the cold dawn mist above Lake Ageri, who watched the glittering column of Habsburg pride march into their trap, who found the courage to attack when every reasonable calculation said they should flee or submit. The perfect ambush at Morgarten teaches us that the course of history is never inevitable, that small groups of determined people can indeed change the world, that conventional wisdom is sometimes fatally wrong, and that the willingness to fight for freedom, really fight for it with everything you have, can overcome seemingly impossible odds. It teaches us that terrain matters, that tactics matter, that knowing your strengths and your enemy's weaknesses matters more than raw power. Most importantly, it teaches us that the powerful are not invincible, that empires can be resisted, that the arc of history does not automatically favor the strong over the just. 7 centuries later, the waters of Lake Ageri still reflect the mountains above, and in those mountains, the forests still stand where defenders once waited to strike a blow for freedom that echoed through the ages. The blood has long since washed away. The bones have long since turned to dust, but the memory remains, preserved in monuments and museums, in history books and national holidays, in the very identity of a nation that traces its birth to that cold November morning when everything changed. Morgarten reminds us that sometimes, just sometimes, David really does defeat Goliath, that the underdog can triumph, that 2,000 determined farmers can indeed crush an empire's finest knights, and in doing so, change the course of history forever.